Hello, my name is Frederick Noel, and I am one of four Joan Tisch Teaching Fellows at the Whitney Museum of American Art. I am also a PhD candidate in musicology at Cornell University. Today is part one of a two-part course that explores how different musical ideas resonate with artworks featured in Edges of Ailey, and how these ideas connect to the musical world of Alvin Ailey. So here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. I'll begin by outlining the structure of the exhibition and introducing the curatorial framework for this section that's titled Black Music. This will include a brief reflection on Ailey's own thoughts about jazz and its significance in his work. From there, we'll dive into how Ailey's musical ideas, particularly around jazz, resonate with three abstract paintings that anchor the Black music section. First, we'll look at Sam Gilliam's Swing 64 and do a bit of music theory as a way to think about how the feeling of swing might or might not be reflected in the rhythms and movements of his painting. Then I'll turn to Norman Lewis's Fantasy 2, where we'll think about how the concept of improvisation in music shifts depending on cultural contexts, using the layers and textures of the painting as a point of entry. And lastly, we'll look and listen to Buford Delaney's abstract portrait of Charlie Parker and consider how he uses color to capture the emotional and spiritual light of Parker's music. I hope this session sparks a lively discussion about the deep intersections between music and abstract painting, something I'm very interested in. So I'll be sure to save some time for Q&A at the end. So for the exhibition overview, and these are the three paintings that I'm going to look at. Edges of Ailey is the first large-scale museum exhibition to celebrate the life and work of the choreographer Alvin Ailey. It is curated by Adrian Edwards, the Inglespire Family Curator and Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Edges of Ailey was a deeply researched project, the culmination of 6 years of work led by Edwards with support from Josh Lubin-Levy and CJ Salapare. The exhibition opened in September and will be on view until February 9th, 2025, I believe. Alvin Ailey was born in 1931 in Rogers, Texas, and he founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in 1958. He remained an influential figure until his death in 1989. This exhibition acknowledges Ailey not only as an icon of modern dance, but as one of the most culturally impactful figures in US history, while also highlighting his global influence. These images are just a small selection of posters from the AAADT's international engagements, which are on view in the exhibition. Edges of Ailey doesn't follow a traditional retrospective exhibition format. This is why I also want to ground the format and the structure before we talk about individual works. It's not chronologically organized, and it's unlike other historical surveys of modern dance that I've seen before. You won't find costumes on mannequins or a bench to watch extensive documentary footage on. Instead, as you step into the exhibition, you are met with a wide open, expansive space. From nearly every angle, glimpses of Ailey's choreography or archival media are surrounding you, creating an immersive backdrop for an installation that features the work of over 80 artists. This image, I tried to pick one that offered a glimpse of just how expansive the space is when the fifth floor is completely opened up, but it really only shows about half of the entire open floor. And I attended one of the opening events with one of my old teachers who is a dancer, and it reminded her of being in an open dance studio. So in addition to all of this, the exhibition also includes a performance program in the Hess Theater featuring 10 dance commissions and a week-long monthly residency by the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater throughout the exhibition's run. Physically, the exhibition has a threefold structure. The first part is the archival materials selected from the Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation and the Black Archives of Mid-America, displayed in vitrines. So in this slide, I've added some pink arrows, which are pointing to where archival materials are displayed in this particular space. So they're dispersed around, and some of these offer a very personal perspective of Ailey. Next, the second part is a looping 18-channel montage drawn from the audiovisual collection of the Ailey Archive, which is projected above the exhibition space, running across the top half of the back wall. In this photo, the montage shows different dancers performing Ailey's iconic three-part solo piece, Cry, which premiered in 1971. Overall, the majority of the montage is composed of nearly 200 videos sourced by the curatorial team for the Ailey Foundation archive. The montage uses archival videos, but it is not objective footage or trying to be objective footage. It is a creative collaboration between Edwards and filmmakers Kaya Liu and Josh Beckley, which cultivates a very immersive presence in the gallery. You won't see it in this still, but it is loud in here. The video is highly cinematic, and one way to engage with this exhibition is to simply come in and immerse yourself in the montage as a standalone experience. So the third part of Edges of Ailey, and what I'll be looking at mostly today, is the installation itself. This features a wide array of artworks that connect Ailey in 4 distinct ways: through artistic collaborations, artists referenced in Ailey's notebooks, new works created in direct response to Ailey's legacy, and works that broadly resonate with the thematic elements of Ailey's choreography. And if anyone would like more information about this structure or about the 4 different ways really that the works in the exhibition connect with Ailey, I have some examples and slides prepared that I'd be happy to share. The Q&A session would be a great time to ask. Together, these elements, the archival material, the 18-channel montage, create immersive environment that surrounds, it envelops the artworks in the installation, allowing visitors to engage with Ailey's legacy and to hopefully provoke thinking about the themes in his choreography on multiple levels. In this slide, you can see the montage sweeping around on the right, and I've added some arrows pointing to where Ailey's notebooks are installed to help one get a sense of how they work together to create a kind of counterpoint with the objects in the installation. The term constellation is key to understanding this conceptual framework. Edwards uses this term specifically to describe how interconnected stories, ideas, and inspirations form a fuller picture of Ailey's life and work. And the logic behind this idea works something like this. Just like stars in a constellation are framed and connected to create a recognizable pattern, this exhibition is bringing together the stories of how Ailey came to be, the ideas that preoccupied him, and the inspirations behind his visionary choreography and company. So the constellation of ideas that I will be focusing on today relates to the specific section of the exhibition titled Black Music. And to give everyone a better sense of how this section is being framed, especially if you haven't had a chance to visit, I want to read the wall label that introduces it to viewers in the museum, and I apologize for my wonky iPad mini picture. For Alvin Ailey, dance and music were art forms of and for the people, originating and enduring in homes, the streets, and other everyday spaces. Rather than seeing dance as merely a response to music, he saw that both allowed an artist to express the spectrum of their feelings and experiences, a pillar of Ailey's creative philosophy. The foundation of Ailey's dances often stemmed from the rich history of Black musical traditions, from the stirring harmonies of gospel and spirituals to the existential tenor of blues and soul, and to the improvisations and discordant rhythms of jazz. In one notebook, he wrote, "One must discover what the music is about and visualize it if possible." Dance was his way of meeting this dual imperative, to embody music's energy and to enhance its possibilities of meaning through movement. Beyond setting his dances to specific songs, Ailey often relied on their melodies and percussive beats to dictate his initial choreographic steps and patterns. He also frequently turned to the lives of singers and musicians as his subjects, including Duke Ellington, Donny Hathaway, Hugh Masekela, Jay McShann, Charlie Parker, Nina Simone, Bessie Smith, among others. So this is documentation from one of those tributes to Masekela Langage, a piece that is set to the music of South African jazz composer and trumpeter Hugh Masekela. And here's another slide of some posters that are Ailey's tributes to Duke Ellington. And Mikhail Baryshnikov and Judith Jamison are in the one on the right. So a key point I want to bring out from the wall text, let's go back to this slide, is Ailey's interest in how music communicates and how feeling connects dance and music. And in this way, all the works in this section ask broader questions. How does music communicate? What does it mean to visualize music, if possible, as Ailey asked of his students? Music can communicate in a literary way. It can advance a plot, a story, or a narrative, or it can be instructional. Think of the Macarena. There are also musical cues and instructional safety videos. Certainly on airplanes, you might get a ding ding to tell you where to stay in line. But music also has the capacity to communicate in ways that go beyond or are different from language. Sometimes it's hard to put into words exactly what music makes us feel or understand, because its meaning, what the music is about, can be deeply personal and beyond description. This ineffability, or the inability to fully describe a music in words, allows music to express emotions, ideas, and experiences in ways that transcend linguistic explanation. In some cases, this ability of music, the power of music, can open up a space for deeper nonverbal communication. As this exhibition demonstrates, many artists have been drawn to this power, harnessing this musical ability to communicate beyond language in their own creative processes. The three works I'll focus on today connect not only to Ailey's interest in the relationship between music and feeling, and music as an abstraction, or music as meaningful beyond words, but also to Ailey's deep connection to jazz and his reflections on its significance. These works, from left to right, are by Buford Delaney, Norman Lewis, and Sam Gillian. And before diving into a closer analysis of these pieces, I want to first bring in some context that's Ailey's own thoughts on jazz, specifically one typed note that is displayed in a vitrine in the Black music section, which you can see on this slide, and the blue arrows pointing to where it is. Since the text is very faint, I'll read it out loud for clarity. There is not a single emotion that jazz cannot encompass. Not only joy and depression, but indignation, anger, and scores of specific emotion. Jazz is specific. It is what each musician feels as he plays. And that concatenation of emotions comes from specific experiences in each player's life. There is no one philosophy of jazz. Each player is his own prophet, and the messages range from picaresque defiance to comfortable acceptance of whatever values are negotiable at the moment. So several points that Ailey makes here resonates with some of the ideas in the paintings by Gilliam, Lewis, and Delaney, and I want to highlight them up front, so it's kind of in our thinking. One is Ailey notes that there is no singular philosophy of jazz, emphasizing that jazz defies essentialist definitions and operates within fluid spaces of cultural exchange and begs diverse interpretations. He also highlights the emotional breadth of jazz, stating that it encompasses everything from joy to indignation. Abstraction and improvisation in jazz helps allow it to capture a wide range of human emotions and sensations. Ailey also recognizes jazz's ability to reflect the lived experiences of its musicians, as each player draws from personal emotions and specific life experiences. And this makes jazz a deeply individual and expressive art form. And finally, Ailey emphasizes that each player is his own prophet, underscoring how jazz musicians express their personal and social identities through improvisation. So this painting, it's turned out a corner here, is titled Swing 64, and it was made in 1964 by Sam Gilliam. The title, Swing, in this case, is a reference to the idea of swing in music, which is an important rhythmic feature of jazz and groove-based music. So the open-ended question that I want to ask about this painting is, does it swing? Does this painting swing? Is it swinging? Does it have swing? Before diving into these essential questions, I want to provide some background on Gilliam and his artistic evolution, which will help us better understand how this painting might relate to the concept of swing. Then we'll return to explore a little music theory to consider whether or not Swing 64 embodies the feel of swing. Sam Gilliam was born in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1933, and he moved to Washington, D.C. in 1962 after completing graduate school in Louisville. He passed away in 2022 after having a studio in D.C. for nearly 6 decades. When Gilliam moved to D.C. in the early 60s, there was a strong contingent of abstract painters gaining prominence, affiliated with what has become known as the Washington Color Painters or the Washington Color School. Some of the most prominent artists in this group were Morris Louis, Kenneth Noland, and Thomas Downing. And in particular, Gilliam formed a close relationship with Downing, who is known for his geometric works, especially his grid-like compositions using colorful dots. In the late 1960s, Gilliam distinguished himself from the color school painters primarily by breaking away from the flat, hard-edged geometric abstraction that defined a lot of that work. Arguably, his most significant innovation came when he abandoned the use of traditional stretcher bars and began creating his iconic drape paintings. Around 1968, he started to hang these unstretched painted canvases from ceilings or walls, allowing them to form very relaxed, flowing shapes in 3 dimensions. Here's an example of one of these drape paintings titled Bow Form Construction from 1968. I mentioned the drape paintings to give some background to Gilliam's practice, but also to highlight how strikingly different they are from the painting that's currently on view in Edges of Ailey. This is a contrast that a lot of people have commented about, myself included. This painting was made just a few years earlier in 1964 when Gilliam was painting stripes and doing a very hard-edged style of painting that reflects the geometric influence of some of the color school painters. At that time, he would work with raw canvas using tape to create precise, defined lines as he brushed the paint onto the surface. This painting is in the Black music section of Edges of Ailey because it connects to the importance of jazz, not just for Ailey, but for many Black American artists working in the 50s, 60s, and 70s who were creating alongside the evolving jazz scene. This is a quote from Gilliam about the intermingling of the DC painting and jazz scenes. And as he mentions, noting that some white artists were also drawn to this mix. So here's some of the quote. Whatever was spinning on the disc in the early 60s by way of music gave us all something to talk about and something actually literally to share. It became an oddity when some of us in the early 60s used to hang out in Georgetown more than we hung out on 14th Street. And if we hung out on 14th Street, we hung out with some white artists who wanted to come to 14th Street or who wanted to come to 11th Street to hear Monk or Mal or Chico. In many ways, by the music, we were being challenged to see and challenged for the proof that Dizzy asked for, and that you were going beyond, in many ways, the sort of verbal into what was that real kind of control that is at least the wholeness that comes from at least a certain kind of combination of whole body expression. I like this quote because it vividly illustrates how jazz was deeply woven into the artistic scenes in DC, but it also highlights Gilliam's insight into how music challenges perception, pushing beyond words into a realm of embodied whole body expression, which resonates with the idea and the feel of swing in jazz and in groove-based music. So to return to what swing is, and this is the music theory part. In music, the term swing is used to denote a general feel, a swinging feel that is engendered by particular rhythmic interactions. Swing is a key feature of jazz, but it is also found in groove-based music such as R&B, soul, funk, disco, and hip hop. In jazz and groove-based styles, swing adds a kind of forward motion, emotional energy to a rhythm without necessarily disrupting the overall beat. This forward motion, this swing, is the result of a slight unevenness in how some notes are played, and the uneven timing of these swung notes where beats are either stretched and shortened cultivates a unique rhythmic feel that pulls you in and keeps you swaying or tapping along. One of the quintessential examples of swing is in James Brown's funk classic, Get Up. And I'm going to play a short clip of this now, just to hopefully reacquaint everyone with how swing feels. So in this short clip, notice how the instruments, the guitar, the drums, and bass, all play certain offbeat notes in a way that's not perfectly even.
Get up, get on up, get up, get on up, stay on the scene, get on up, like a sex machine, get on up, get up.
So compared to the main beat, the rhythmic sounds that the instruments are making are slightly delayed or swung, and that's what creates that funky feel. So I want to play it again, if it'll let me, to kind of feel that swing one more time.
Get up, get on up, get up, get on up, stay on the scene, get on up, like a sex machine, get on up, get up.
So unlike music theoretical contexts like pitch or even rhythm, where someone can be off key or off beat, swing is judged a little differently. Swing is judged by how much it makes you feel like moving. Music doesn't truly swing unless you can sense its rhythm and get caught up in its energy. And this value judgment of swing brings me back to that original open-ended question about Gilliam's Swing 64. Does this painting swing? So to explore this, I want to consider how some of the formal elements that create swing in music may be reflected in this painting. So forward motion. In jazz, swing adds a sense of forward momentum to the rhythm. And in Swing 64, the diagonal lines push forward across the canvas, creating maybe a dynamic energy that visually moves the eye from one corner to another, mimicking that same forward drive found in music with swing. There's also, I think more pronouncedly, a slight unevenness in this painting. So swing in music often results from slight variations in timing. And in Swing 64, while the lines are precise, and they certainly appear precise, the color shifts from deep blue to orange to red, introducing a visual rhythm that feels to me like a subtle syncopation, adding some complexity to the uniformity of the shapes. There's also an important line created by some negative space between the chevrons that is slightly uneven, perhaps a little swung. It's not lined up with that grid. And additionally, and this is so slight, the lines at the bottom that are the force lines of the two chevrons, they have their own directional energy, and they cross at a point that is just off the bottom of the canvas, which adds to the feeling of imbalance and motion. Rhythmically, in music, swing pulls you into its groove, encouraging movement and flow. And the repeated yet slightly varied chevron shapes in swing do create a rhythmic pattern that seems to echo the back and forth swaying found in swing music. So by comparing these visual elements to the characteristics of swing music, Swing 64 seems to embody, to me, the same qualities of forward motion, rhythm, and flow that define swing in jazz. But ultimately, just like in music, whether or not this painting swings is subjective and personal, depending on how each person experiences rhythm and flow. But in either case, if you think it swings or it doesn't, Swing 64 is inspiring some kind of interaction with slightly uneven rhythm, line, and color that keeps one connected in the moment. This feeling of continuous engagement in swing is significant because it offers a different kind of musical pleasure, one that isn't about waiting for a final revolution or resolution, but about being immersed in the process as it unfolds. Unlike many other types of music that build toward a clear resolution or goal, so think of like a symphony that ends on a big final chord or a song, swing is about being fully present in the moment and enjoying the process of moving with the music. Similarly, this approach can change, I believe, how we look at painting. Instead of simply observing it from a distance as an image, one can engage with the work, becoming part of its rhythmic journey, its swing. This abstract, geometric, hard-edged painting becomes more musical. And by framing the painting this way, Gilliam is encouraging a more dynamic and participatory experience, just as swing tries to draw you in to its constant motion. So the next painting I want to discuss is just to the left of Swing 64, and it's another abstract work by an artist who was deeply influenced by jazz and whose ideas evolved in parallel with the music. This painting is titled Fantasy 2, and it was made by Norman Lewis in 1946. This work engages with a different musical idea, improvisation, which, like swing, is a feature that connects the various styles within the constellation of jazz. While one might think of improvisation as a single concept, I certainly did before, I want to consider how Fantasy 2 encourages one to explore how the meaning of improvisation can shift depending on cultural context, offering a little bit of a deeper look at its complexities in different artistic, social, and political environments. And like with Gilliam, before diving into the discussion of improvisation, I want to briefly provide some background on Norman Lewis to better frame the discussion, especially because this painting, Fantasy 2, played an important transitional role in his artistic evolution from social realism to abstraction. Norman Lewis was born in Harlem in 1909. He studied with the sculptor Augusta Savage, and she was the first director of the Harlem Community Arts Center, where Lewis also taught. He was employed by the Federal Art Project for a time, which was funded by FDR's Works Progress Administration. Lewis was also part of the 306 Group, a collective of Black artists and intellectuals who fostered a cross-pollination of ideas between art, literature, and music. Music was also a major presence in his family life, as his brother Saul was an accomplished musician who performed with Count Basie and Chick Webb. Additionally, Lewis's studio was located near iconic music venues like the Savoy Ballroom and the Apollo Theater, which really placed him at the heart of the jazz scene in Harlem. In 1963, Lewis co-founded the artist collective Spiral, along with Romare Bearden, Charles Alston, and Hale Woodruff, who held numerous discussions concerning the position of Black artists in US society. So as I mentioned, Lewis began his artistic career in the 1930s as a social realist. His early works were marked by a deep commitment to illustrative social commentary, and he began making work depicting Black Americans struggling against the weight of systemic racism. And this is an example of just one of those early works titled The Soup Kitchen from 1937. By the mid-1940s, Lewis began shifting toward abstraction. He eventually became associated with abstract expressionism, believing that his artistic contributions should transcend representation and focus on broader cultural and aesthetic innovation. Even as he embraced abstraction, Lewis still remained politically conscious, and he saw abstraction as a way to stay engaged with the civil rights movement. So this is a notable photo of the Abstract Expressionist Artists Meeting at Studio 35, organized by Willem de Kooning and Franz Klein. And as you can see here, there are no women present, and Norman Lewis is the only person that is not white. He's sitting on the left side where the pink arrow is. Now, the painting on view in Edges of Aileen represents an early stage in Lewis's move toward abstraction. It's included in the Black music section because at this time, music, specifically blues and jazz, played a major role in his creative evolution. By 1945, Lewis began speaking about painting in increasingly musical terms, comparing color to sound and noting how subtle shifts in tone could be explosive. And this is a quote from the 70s. I suppose painting is just like music, like sound. You hear a new nuance, which to me in color can be subtly explosive. One of Lewis's key influences during this transition to abstraction was the Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky, who theorized an affinity between music and painting, which was his idea that both art forms could express emotions abstractly. So Kandinsky wrote a lot and believed that just as music can evoke deep emotional resonance without depicting anything literal, anything concrete, painting could also convey concepts and feelings without literal representation. So this idea deeply resonated with Lewis, who sought to create paintings that, like music, could communicate on a more visceral, emotional level beyond representation. In 1946, Lewis saw an exhibition of Kandinsky's works, and some art historians have noted that Kandinsky's painting, Improvisation with Cold Forms from 1914, was particularly influential in inspiring Lewis. Instead of focusing on any formal similarities between improvisation and Fantasy 2, and there are some arguments that there are, like the little eyes motif or the pronounced waves of blue, I want to think instead about how both titles evoke musical improvisation and invite a discussion on how improvisation can be expressed in abstract painting. And just to get everyone on the same page, in music, a fantasy or a fantasia refers to a musical form characterized by a free-flowing improvisational structure. Improvisation is not a universal concept. It is shaped by the traditions and values of the people engaging with it. So it's a little more unwieldy than maybe a concept like polka or a mazurka. To illustrate this, I want to introduce two different approaches to improvisation as described by the composer and musicologist and professor at Columbia University, George Lewis. And these two different approaches are the aphrological tradition and the urological tradition. In his influential text, Improvised Music After 1950, George Lewis explains that the aphrological tradition of improvisation, rooted in African-American music like jazz, is based on historical continuity and collective creativity. In this context, improvisation isn't purely spontaneous, but is layered. It connects the past and future, creating depth and complexity. By contrast, the urological tradition, rooted in roughly European classical music with strict scores, tends to view improvisation as pure spontaneity, disconnected from the past or the future and existing only in the present moment. And this idea has its roots in European 19th century musical aesthetics, which celebrated the notion of creative genius as something that's a flash that emerges in the moment, independent of history or preparation. So George Lewis explains the urological view as follows in this pretty dense quote, but we could follow along. The urological notion of pure spontaneity in improvisation fails to account for this temporally multilaminar, layered aspect of an improvisation. By fixing upon the surface level of immediate spontaneity, unsullied by reference to the past or foreshadowing of the future, the reduction of the notion of improvisative spontaneity to the present moment insists on ephemerality. In its extreme form, this notion requires that an improvisation be done once and never heard in any form again. So now I want to return back to Fantasy 2, which engages with the aphrological tradition of jazz improvisation. The painting is rich with layers of color and form that invite sustained active viewing. Much like layered improvisation in jazz, each brushstroke in Fantasy 2 builds on the one before it, connecting past and future within the composition, creating a lot of depth that draws on history while simultaneously offering something new. So every time you engage with it. Now, next, I want to show two different close-up views of this painting. And as you'll hopefully see, each perspective reveals new layers of brush strokes and textures. And with each closer look, subtler details emerge, adding to the complexity of the work. So At this level, at this scale, there's a lot of layers. It's clear, but it gets even more laminar. It gets even more layered. So here's the first zoomed in view. So take a moment to observe how the brushstrokes become more detailed and layered, revealing very intricate textures that weren't visible to me from a distance. And now I cropped this photograph, but there's some that I'm just seeing for the first time, like some of these splashes of paint that really, really sit on the surface, and some of these underpainted marks. So now I want to go even closer. Notice how the layers of paint overlap and interact, further exposing the complexity of the composition and the subtleties within the work. There are a lot of layers in this improvisation, in this fantasia, in this fantasy. So unlike the Eurological tradition of improvisation, which views improvisation as fleeting and potentially disconnected from time, fantasy too, even though it's a painting, reflects an alternative tradition where improvisation is layered. It's an enduring process that really rewards deeper engagement. And in this way, Norman Lewis and George Lewis too challenges us to see improvisation not as something fleeting, but as an evolving process that reveals new depths with each interaction. So the last painting I want to examine from this trio is Buford Delaney's Charlie Parker Yardbird. Unlike, do I have an arrow? I do. Unlike the previous works, which engage with music theoretical concepts like swing and improvisation, this painting is a portrait. However, it's not a traditional figurative portrait. Rather, it's an abstract work that uses color and light to capture not only the physical atmosphere of a jazz club, but also the emotional and spiritual essence of Charlie Parker and his music. So before I take a closer look at this painting, I also want to provide some context about Delaney's background to help better situate his approach and his unique philosophy of color. Delaney is arguably best known for two things: his distinctive emotive approach to figurative portraits and his vibrant expressionist compositions that often explore light and spirit abstractly. Both of these styles are represented in the exhibition, with Marian Anderson, the painting on the right, as an example of his portrait work, which is in Edges of Ailey, and Charlie Parker Yardbird, an example of his abstract work. And I'll talk about both. So Delaney was born in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1901 and moved to Boston in the early 1920s to study art. After studying for 6 years, he moved to New York, where he immersed himself in the downtown avant-garde art scene in the Village, as well as in the Harlem Renaissance scenes. There, he connected with a wide range of artists, including Norman Lewis, Jacob Lawrence, Georgia O'Keeffe, and Alfred Stieglitz, among others. Delaney was also connected to gay bohemian culture in New York and later in Paris, but he struggled with his sexuality throughout his entire life, never fully comfortable with his identity. Recollections of Delaney often characterize him as having a uniquely warm, generous, and profoundly insightful and intellectual personality, which endeared him to many people. In 1953, he moved to Paris from New York, where he found greater freedom from the racial and sexual prejudices he had experienced in the United States. Despite his newfound creative freedom, Delaney continued to grapple with personal struggles. In the 1960s, he faced economic hardship and mental health challenges, culminating in a suicide attempt. Yet during his recovery, he continued to work, and his work gained new depth as his exploration of light took on greater emotional intensity, reflecting his own battle for resilience and inner strength. From the start of his career, Delany developed a distinctive style of portraiture that sought to capture the inner spirit or essence of his subjects rather than focusing on literal representation. This emotionally charged approach, often depicting people he knew or public figures who inspired him, became a defining characteristic of his work. The work in this slide is titled Marian Anderson, and it's Delany's portrait of the renowned singer who was known for her unique contralto voice. And contralto is the lowest female Fach. It's a very low, it's a very specific and relatively rare vocal Fach to have. In Edges of Ailey, Delany's portrait of Anderson is featured in the section titled Black Women. It's included here because Anderson, throughout her distinguished career, inspired many visual artists, including Alvin Ailey, and the exhibition also displays pages from Ailey's notebooks. There's more than one in vitrines which illustrate his connection to Anderson. Delany's portrait of Anderson captures not only her immense talent, but also her resilience and lasting influence as a cultural icon and a symbol of progress, specifically in the history of the performing arts in the 20th century. Anderson made history with her iconic 1939 performance at the Lincoln Memorial, which came after she was denied the opportunity to sing at Constitution Hall due to segregationist policies. The public outcry led to a historic outdoor concert supported by Eleanor Roosevelt and the NAACP that solidified Anderson's role as a kind of symbol or a voice of the civil rights movement. Now, I'd like to play a clip from an archival newsreel about that historic performance, which offers a glimpse into the significance of this cultural moment.
The nation's most impressive Easter demonstration. 75,000 massed before Lincoln Memorial to hear Marian Anderson, colored contralto, make her capital debut at the great Emancipator Shrine. Refusal of the DAR to let her use their hall fanned a countrywide controversy, with this great gathering as the climax. The singer was invited by Secretary of the Interior, Ickes, who attends with Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau. Spectators include Supreme Court Justice Black, New York Senator Robert Wagner, and a host of notables, here to listen to the voice acclaimed by many as the finest in a century.
So after hearing that, let's take another look at Delany's portrait of Anderson. Unlike typical portraits of performers, her mouth is closed and her hands are gently clasped in front of her, emphasizing a calm, dignified demeanor rather than a moment of performance. It could also represent a moment just before or after she sings. Another striking feature is the vivid use of yellow, a color that Delany deeply connected with. For him, yellow, his favorite color, was the color of light, symbolizing spiritual energy and inner illumination. In this painting, Anderson is surrounded by a glowing yellow field that not only captures her presence, but also conveys a sense of her inner spirit, radiating strength and resilience. This yellow also brings a spiritual, almost halo-like quality to the portrait, suggesting an aura of light that reflects both her talent and her enduring influence. Delaney's use of color in the Marian Anderson portrait reflects his broader exploration of light throughout his career. While he continued to make portraits like this one, by the 1940s, he began experimenting with pure abstract works. And by the 1950s, expressionistic color studies, like the two here, were often centered around the theme of light. And this kind of work became a central focus of his practice. These are two examples of abstract pieces titled Scattered Light and Moving Sunlight. And as the titles allude, Delaney had a deep connection to light. He explored light not only as a physical phenomenon of vibration or through the effects of light on color, but also as a metaphysical force, an inner light. Ultimately, these works reflect his idea that the spirit is revealed to us through the interplay of color and light. Delaney also viewed music as a deeply spiritual force. For him, music was a vital, life-sustaining element. He valued the sacredness of vernacular music like jazz, boogie woogie, and blues, and considered them to be just as spiritually significant as gospel and liturgical music, if not more. Jazz and blues in particular had a profound influence on Delaney, and he frequently wrote in his journals about his personal connection to jazz. He was also deeply engaged with how to visually represent jazz, exploring ways to capture its particular vibration and energy through color and light. So looking at those abstract works, now I want to return to the painting that's installed in the Black Music section at Edges of Ailey, which stands out because it functions as both a portrait and an abstract color work. When I first encountered this painting, I was very struck by the color scheme, especially considering how significant color was to Delaney's practice. He works in a lot of colors, but often he worked with luminous hues like yellow, using translucent washes or opalescent effects. But here we see a grayed pink radiating through a smoky background, which felt really different. Doing some research, I came across a quote in a book, Amazing Grace, about Delaney's life, which I think sheds some light on his use of color in this particular piece. So to kind of conclude, I want to share that with you now. Tonight, my course in art has started. For the first time, I have really felt the enormity of the jazz idiom. Of course, it most certainly takes light suffused with pink and smoky atmosphere. In this quote, Delaney interprets jazz through the lens of color and light, which is remarkable in itself, but it also helps explain the grayed pink and the smoky hues in this painting, linking them to his perception of the atmosphere in a jazz club or a performance space. However, this isn't just a depiction of the atmosphere, it's also a portrait of the legendary jazz musician Charlie Parker, who is widely known by his nickname Yardbird or just Bird. Parker's main instrument was this saxophone, the alto saxophone, which became closely associated with his style and the bebop movement. Delaney's painting could also be a kind of tribute to Bird because it was painted in 1958, a few short years after Parker's death in 1955. So before we take a last look, or hopefully a listen, to Delaney's portrait, I want to play a clip of Parker performing at Birdland, which was a jazz club in Manhattan named after him. And the reason I'm sharing this live recording is that it's raw and unpolished, unlike a studio recording. This allows us to hear not only Parker's playing, but also how the sound interacts with the space, the way it cuts through the ambient noise and reflects off the walls, giving one a real sense of how his saxophone filled and shaped the atmosphere of the club. And this is an excerpt from A Night in So with this sound in our ears, let's return to Delaney's portrait. This painting captures the energy and vibration of a jazz performance with the color of the pink, which is the color of the light filled with smoke, radiating from the center of the canvas. The pink, also reminiscent of atmospheric club lighting perhaps, moves outward from a central point in undulating waves, much like how sound flows from the bell of an instrument like a saxophone. The pink light emanating through the smoky gray hues creates a kind of visual rhythm, vibrating with the intensity of Parker's music. This visual flow mirrors the flow of sound, spreading through the canvas as Parker's music might fill a room, capturing the dynamic energy of both the atmosphere and the musician's presence. In a way that also echoes Delaney's belief that the spirit is revealed through color and light, the painting transforms sound into a sensory experience. The interplay of light, smoky grays, and pink light becomes a kind of visual manifestation of Parker's music. In a similar way, in other works, like Delaney used light to express the essence of spirit. Through this dynamic interaction, Delaney captures not only the spiritual essence of the music, something he was very interested in, but also that essence and the enduring presence of Charlie Parker. And just to conclude, I know we're right at time. Here is an archival image of Alvin Ailey's tribute to Charlie Parker titled For Bird with Love. So thank you for being very patient. And maybe there's like a minute to answer some questions if anyone has a burning question or a technical question about the format of the exhibition. But thank you very much for listening. I hope I'm doing this correctly.
Hi, Fred. It's Andy. I'm not sure if you can see the
don't see
questions. They're just compliments. Tamika Carroll says this was amazing. That's our only question for right now. So,
Oh, I really appreciate that, Tamika.
well,
Okay,
thank you
well,
so
there's
much,
no
Fred.
questions. Thank you very much. And if you are able to see the exhibition and haven't seen it yet, I highly, highly recommend it. And I highly recommend taking your time traversing through the channels in the open space. It's a very open exhibition, but you could really just spend time in little pockets. And I'm really just dealing with works in one section for this talk. So next week, I'll expand some more and deal with some other topics as well. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.